If you're trying to choose between different monitor panel types and you're getting confused by all the conflicting information online, you're not alone. Most explanations of panel types focus on technical specs that don't really translate to real-world differences. Response times measured in milliseconds, contrast ratios with massive numbers, color gamut percentages that mean nothing to most everyday users. What actually matters is how these differences affect your gaming experience, your productivity work, and whether you'll be happy with your choice 6 months down the track. Now, while there are other panel types available like OLED and TN, IPS and VA are two of the most common types for everyday gamers and productivity users who want good performance without necessarily breaking the bank. So IPS over here stands for in-plane switching and VA over here stands for vertical alignment. These names refer to how the liquid crystals in each panel type are arranged and how they move to control light. And we don't necessarily need to know all the technical details, but knowing these differences will help us understand how these panels have both their strengths and their weaknesses. IPS panels prioritize color accuracy and viewing angles. The way the panel is structured allows for more consistent colors and better visibility from different angles, but it makes it harder to block light completely for true blacks. VA panels focus on contrast and deeper blacks by arranging crystals in a way that blocks light more effectively, but this arrangement makes them slower to respond and limits viewing angles. Now I've got two AOC monitors right here that represent the most common options people face when shopping for a gaming monitor. The main one is the AOC Q27G2S, which is a 27-inch IPS panel, 1440p at 155 Hz. This cost me around 350 Australian dollars and became my primary display after I simplified everything from a triple display setup. The second monitor is the AOC 24G2SE. This is a 24-inch VA panel which is 1080p and 165 Hz that I picked up for $180. Originally, this was meant to be the secondary display for having videos or spreadsheets on the side while working, but I quickly realized that having multiple screens for me was more distracting than helpful, so I went back to a single monitor setup. Now these here aren't the same size or resolution, which actually makes this comparison a little bit more realistic. You'll likely find yourself rarely choosing between identical monitors that have different panel types, as you're usually deciding whether to spend more for a larger IPS display or save money with a smaller VA panel. When you switch between these panel types, the first thing that hits you is how differently they display color and contrast, and this affects more than how visually appealing your games may look. The IPS panel produces more vibrant and accurate colors. When I'm working on my video thumbnails or editing footage, the colors that I see on the IPS panel are much closer to what you'll see on your phone or your other devices. VA panels do take a completely different approach. They sacrifice some color accuracy to achieve much deeper blacks and better contrast. Where the IPS panel shows dark areas pretty much as gray, the VA panels can produce actual black. This difference becomes really apparent when you're in a dark room playing atmospheric games or watching movies. The IPS panel over here also suffers from something called IPS glow, which is a light glowing effect that can particularly be seen during darker scenes. This glow becomes more noticeable in dark rooms and affects the edges and corners of the screens most. VA panels don't escape this either though, as they suffer from grey clouding and purple color shifts in darker scenes, especially on budget models like what I have here. Playing something like Jedi Survivor over here, the IPS panel makes darker scenes look a bit washed out and grey. You can see details in shadows that should be completely black, which ruins the atmosphere the developers create. Switch to the VA panel for the same scene and those black areas are actually black. The lightsaber effects pop dramatically and the whole experience feels more cinematic. This also makes VA panels better for HDR content, where that deeper contrast helps bright highlights pop against darker backgrounds. Now here's where things get interesting, because you can actually see and feel the differences while you're gaming. I'm using the UFO test website to check for ghosting and motion blur, which shows moving objects at different speeds so you can spot any trailing effects. On the IPS monitor, the moving objects look pretty clean with minimal ghosting. There is a little bit if you really look for it, but it's not really distracting. The VA panel on the other hand shows much more obvious trailing behind moving objects. This happens because VA panels respond slower to changes, creating providing those ghosting images. In actual gaming, this translates to very different experiences depending on what you play. Marvel Rivals, which is probably the most fast-paced game that I play, feels responsive and clean on the IPS panel. When I'm tracking players or quickly moving around, everything stays pretty sharp. The same gameplay on the VA monitor feels noticeably different. Now, look, it's not terrible, but once you've experienced the cleaner motion of IPS, the VA panel feels sluggish in comparison. Most people assume that viewing angles don't matter anyway because you sit directly in front of your monitor, but this limitation will affect your daily use more than you think it will. IPS panels maintain consistent colors and contrasts even when viewed off center. You can lean back or you can move around without the image changing dramatically. The VA panel though shows significant color shifting and contrast loss when viewed from any particular angle. Even just leaning to one side will make everything look washed out and, quite frankly, incorrect. Now, for a single monitor setup, this might seem irrelevant, but even the edges of a very large screen are at an angle to your eyes. On my 27-inch IPS, the corners look consistent with the center of the panel. If this were a 27-inch VA panel, you'd notice color differences between the center and the edges just from your regular viewing. This will only become more problematic as your screen size increases. What's really interesting though is how different game types will bring out the best and the worst in each panel type. Fast-paced competitive games will benefit from an IPS panel's motion clarity, though serious competitive players still often prefer TN panels for faster refresh rates and response times, but IPS panels are bridging that gap as time goes on. So for most people, IPS will provide a good balance of speed and visual quality that will work well for competitive gaming. Story-driven single-player games often look better on VA panels because of the superior contrast. Horror games in particular will benefit dramatically from true blacks that create genuine atmosphere instead of the grey blacks of IPS panels. OLED panels take this even further with perfect blacks, but they tend to cost more than what most people want to spend, and they come with burning concerns. And though they have been improved over the years, a lot of manufacturers will provide warranty for that exact thing. Now, most of what we've covered applies to flat panel monitors, but curved monitors throw an interesting wrinkle into the mix in this debate of IPS versus VA. You've probably noticed that most curved gaming monitors are VA panels, and that's actually no accident. The curve helps to solve one of VA's biggest weaknesses because it keeps more of the screen perpendicular to your eyes, which reduces the color shifting and viewing angle issues we talked about earlier. IPS curved monitors do exist, but they're less common and usually cost more. Since IPS viewing angles are already great on flat panels, the curve would be more about immersion. So if you're seriously considering a curved monitor for your setup, you're almost certainly going to be looking at VA panels, which means you'll need to accept those motion blur trade-offs we discussed earlier in exchange for better contrast and that wraparound immersive gaming experience. But after testing these both extensively over the years, here's what I would actually suggest for most setups. Out of the two, for a main monitor, I would suggest an IPS panel for most people. The motion clarity, the color accuracy, and the viewing angle consistency make it a very versatile option for a lot of people who use their setups for gaming, for productivity work, or even just casual use. Now, VA panels do excel at atmospheric games and watching movies in a dark room because of the superior contrast, but the viewing angle limitations and the motion blur make them a little bit less ideal as an all-around display. The price gap has narrowed enough that IPS is worth the extra cost for the versatility you get. The IPS glow in dark scenes is a trade-off, but for a single monitor that needs to handle everything well, IPS gives you the most consistent experience in my opinion. And there are some higher end monitors that use mini LED backlighting with either an IPS or VA panel, which will give you better contrast and HDR performance than standard backlighting. But you're still choosing between the same fundamental IPS and VA characteristics that we've discussed. And that is it. If this comparison helped you understand the differences between IPS and VA panels, a like would be great. And let me know in the comments which display type makes the best sense for your setup. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe for more tech-related content. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.